We're on the Mishnah on 55b2. And the Mishnah says as follows. You're allowed to place eggs under hens that are brooding. Okay? On Erev Pesach, on Nisan, and most places can hold. That means even the entire day of Erev Pesach, because that's not called work, putting the eggs back underneath the hens. And in the case of a brooding hen that ran away, and I'm going to give this away, and we get her back within 3 days, we're allowed to bring her back to her place. And the Gemara right away is going to ask, if I already said I'm allowed to do that in the first place, I'm allowed to place the eggs under the hens, even on Erev Pesach. So, of course, if the chicken runs away, why shouldn't I be able to bring her and put her on the eggs? It's exactly the same thing. Gemara is going to tackle that in a minute. The Mason, if the hen should pass away while brooding, we're allowed to bring another hen and put that other hen on top of the eggs. So you're allowed to clear away all the schmutz from under the animal's feet on Erev Pesach. Again, you're allowed to dispose of it. You're allowed to throw it out. But on Chala Moyed, right, on the middle days of the Yontif, Misalkin Litzadon, you can only push it to the side. And the Gemara is going to get into exactly what are the limitations here. Obviously, because it's Chala Moyed, we want you to do less work. You can't simply gather it up and have to carry it to the garbage bin. Instead, you push it off to the side. We're allowed to take utensils, kalim, we're allowed to take them to, and we're allowed to get back from the house of the craftsman who's fixing them up, even though we're not going to need it for Yom Tov. Well, apparently, this is talking about also on Erev Pesach. Zokti Gemara. On the first thing that we said, you could put the eggs under a hen that got up and get them to brood, and you're allowed to go chase after a hen that ran away and put it back on the eggs. So it says the Gemara, and we said you're allowed to place the eggs under the hen for brooding. Why do we have to tell us that you're allowed to bring back the hen to continue brooding? Amar Abaya, says Abaya, Sefer, that in the last part of the Mishnah where it says you're allowed to return it to her plate, Asya l'chalamoyed. We're now on 55b3. We've now come to Chalamoid. We're saying even on Chalamoid, should she run away, we're allowed to go ahead and retrieve her and put her back on the eggs. Amar Rav Huna, lo yishanu. This is not said elotoy shloishul mirad. Only from within 3 days of her rebelling, meaning she rebelled and got off the eggs and ran away from her flight. The akati loy parach tzimmer, because the heat, her desire to brood, hasn't disappeared from her within 3 days, and she will be amenable to go back to brooding. The akashloishim the yeshivasa, and only after 3 days of her brooding, the subtalabi boy legami, because then she's completely ruined the eggs. The eggs are ruined. After 3 days, they're ruined. Okay, so only if we've got 3 things going on over here. One, that it's within 3 days of her running away, and only 3 days after, within 3 days of her brooding. Hold on 1 minute, please. Hello. Yes. Hi. Which check? No, I didn't put it. I gave you guys 2 checks the other day. Very good. All right. So do me a favor to give up the check. You need to give up the check. Okay? Thank you. Bye-bye. And I'll pick them up from you. Bye-bye. Bye. Sorry about that. Boca Grove Country Club business. Anyway, so here we go. So the Gemara says like this, we need two things over here. Only 3 days when she rebelled and ran away. Within those 3 days, she still has the desire to brood. And only after 3 days of her brooding, then the eggs are completely ruined. So we need three things. It has to be within 3 days of her beginning of her brooding and within 3 days of her running away. But if it's 3 days after she ran away, the parak like simamine, and then her desire disappeared. So that even if you bring her back, she's not going to want to sit on the eggs. But it's what he called, or it's within 3 days. It's within 3 days of her brooding, in which the eggs are not completely ruined. You do not bring her back, because we need both possibilities. She has to still have the desire to brood, and it has to be within 3 days of her initial brooding. If it's within 3 days of her brooding, even though she seems to have run away, this is not the first time she run away, and she seems to have lost all desire for brooding, we still bring her back. But Maika Mefligi. Marsava, Rav Huna holds, Lehepsim Meruba Chashoshu, Lehepsim U'et Loi Chashu. For a big financial loss, we worry. But for small financial losses, we're not going to worry. We're not going to break the rules of Chalamoid. And this is a small financial loss. Sorry. Umar Saba, the rabbis are Lehepsim U'et Nami Chashoshu. Even for a minimal loss, we do worry. And since the eggs, at the end of the day, are still salvageable because it's within 3 days of her brooding, and therefore there's some money to be made, even if they're going to be inferior eggs. Since there's some money to be made, we can bring the hen back. Says the Mishnah Baita, Garfin mitachas. We clear away the schmutz from underneath the animals, feed on the 14th. But on Chalamoid, you have to push it to the side. You can't simply clean it up completely and throw it into the ash bin, into the garbage bin. Tanu Rabbanan, Hazevel shebechotzim meslikin oiselitzadodim. The dirt, the dung, the schmutz that's in a courtyard is allowed to be pushed to the side. Sheberefetz ushebechotzim oisian oisel ashba. But we may take out the dung, the schmutz that's in a stable or in a courtyard to the garbage dump outside the courtyard. So it's a haguva kasha. First you say Zebel Shabachatz Masikin it doesn't. The stuff that's in the courtyard has to be pushed to the side. Then you say we take it out to, if it's in a stable or in a courtyard, we're allowed to take it out to the garbage heap outside. So the second ruling is on the 14th of Nisan. There you're allowed to take it out to the outside garbage heap. Where you have to push it to the side. I can learn this up where we're talking about, in both cases, we're talking about Chalamoid. And now we're turning 55b4. If on Chalamoid, the dung, the schmutz, which should be moved to the side. But if there's so much dung that the courtyard begins to smell like a stable, essentially it's turning into a stable, in that case, you're allowed to bring it into the dung heap even on Chal Shamoid. We're allowed to bring two, and we're allowed to take from the house of a craftsman, even though I don't need those vessels for the yontif. Zakti Gemara, Amar Papa, but can Rava tested us. Tanan, and he said like this: we learned that you're allowed to take kalim utensils to and retrieve from a craftsman on even though you do not need it for the yontif. Very minu, but we have a contradiction because I've got another Mishnah. This Mishnah is in Mayit Katan. The Mishnah in Mayit Katan says, you're not allowed to retrieve kalim from the house of a craftsman. But if you're worried about that it might get stolen from his house, you're allowed to transfer it to a different courtyard. One that is near the craftsman. right? But the Mishnah, nonetheless, is clearly saying you're allowed to transfer to a courtyard near the craftsman, near the Uman, but you're not allowed to bring it home, which is obviously much further away from the craftsman, because that is that is an extra, that's an undue burden, an extra work. So our Mishnah says that you are allowed to bring home kalim, utensils from the craftsman. Umashiden, and we answered Rava's question like kasha. So our Mishnah is talking about Erev Pesach on the 14th. There you're allowed to bring it back from the craftsman. Well, you're not allowed to, because you're not allowed to do a tircha yisera, an extra amount of work if you could avoid it. Or you can answer. Both are talking about chala shemoy. One is where the owner trusts the craftsman, so the Tana did not give him permission to bring it home to do a tircha yisera, an extra work, and bring it home. Where he doesn't trust the craftsman, you're allowed to, even on Chalamoid, get your stuff back. But Tanya, we learned a brisa very similar to this. Maybe in Kalim Beisel, and you're allowed to retrieve your vessels, your utensils from the craftsman on Chalamoid. Kegoin hakad mi beis hakadon v'akois mi beis zagog, a pitcher from a potter's house and a goblet, a kois from a glassmaker's house. But not wool from a dyer's house. Somebody that dyed the clothes, that's how they made the clothes different colors. Nor vessels, utensils from the craftsman's house. But if the craftsman has nothing to eat, you should pay him. Even on Chalamoid. But leave it with the craftsman to pick up after Yom Tov. But if you don't trust the craftsman, you can deposit it in a house nearby the craftsman, but don't do the extra burden of bringing it home to you. But if you're afraid it's going to get stolen from that house near the craftsman, you're allowed to bring it into your house, covered up, covertly, right? So it's not obvious that you're schlepping things on Chalamayit, but so you can bring it in. Stick it in the trunk of the car. Taratz the Mevi'in. You, Rava, the Gemara says, have resolved the contradiction between our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Mayat Kotin regarding retrieving, bringing back from the craftsman house. Malich and Kasha, what are we going to do about bringing kalim, utensils, to the craftsman? Diktani, because the Mishnah in Mayat Kotin says, Ein Mevi'in, you shall not bring the Kol Shekain She'ein Malichin. I'm sorry, Ein Mevi'in, you shall not retrieve. If you can't retrieve, Kol Shekain She'ein Malichin means that certainly you can't bring it to have it fixed up on Chalamoid. And our Mishnah says that you are allowed to take it over. Elam, so Elamai, the better answer is what we said before, that our Mishnah is talking about Erev Pesach, the 14th of Nisan, where you're allowed to. And here, and this Bryce is talking, this Mishnah is talking about on Chalamoid, which obviously has restrictions. Next Mishnah. The Jewish residents of Yericho did 6 things. Once upon a time, Yericho, Jericho, was not a Palestinian city, was very much a Jewish city. Anyway, Shisha Devarim Asu Anshe Yericho, Al Shloisha Michu Biyadam. On 3 of them, the Chachamim gave them Musar, told them off that they weren't doing what they felt was right. Val Shloisha Lo Michu Biyadam, and on 3 things, no, they did not tell the people off. That doesn't mean they exactly agreed with them, but certainly they did not tell them off. Okay, we are now on 55b5. And these are the ones which they did not reprove the people. They would graft palm trees the entire day of the 14th of Nisan. They didn't stop at midday at Chatzos. They went all the way almost to the night. Now, what's interesting over here, grafting by and large, is asum in Atayra. Yet they didn't have a problem with that. The problem was that they were working all day. They didn't stop at the midway point at Chatzos on Erev Pesach. And the Gemara is obviously going to tackle this. And they would wrap the Shema, the Kriya Shema. What does that mean? The Gemara is going to tackle it. And they would reap and stack before the Omer was brought. Again, we just talked about this morning, yesterday, as it were, on the daf, that on the 16th, they would bring on the 16th of Nisan, on the second day of Pesach, they would bring the carbon oimer, the minchas oimer. And when they brought the oimer, that would allow the new grain, the new growths of grains to be used. Chodosh would be allowed to be used. So now, before that, therefore, we did not allow, the Torah did not allow us to go ahead and reap and stack and smooth out and prepare the new stuff prior to the bringing of the omer, except grains grown in a valley, which were not great grains because they were water soaked, or other stuff grown on mountains that where the wind blasted them, so they weren't so great. Those are not really part of you. Those were not allowed. Those grains were not allowed to be used for the carbon omer. So therefore, the truth is, Minat Torah, you were allowed to reap them, you were allowed to cut them and pile them up and prepare them, because they weren't of the omer, of the best, the meitev haaretz, the best of the ground. Nonetheless, you still weren't allowed to eat them until you brought the omer. The Rabbanon came along and said, even these kind of grains, we don't want you piling them up. We don't want you reaping them. We don't want you certainly piling them up, getting them so ready, because you might come to eat it before the omer is brought. Okay, and nonetheless, this is one of the things which they did not did not give mussar to the people. And then there were three things that they did tell them off. Matirin gamziyos shel hegdish. The people of Yericha permitted for their own personal use the branches of trees belonging to hegdish, to the temple treasury. What was the story? Their fathers had mekadesh the trunks of these trees. In other words, after they were originally pruned, the grandfathers and the great grandfathers were mekadesh, consecrated these trees and gave it to the bedek habayis, to the temple treasury. Now, what happened after that? Obviously, the branches regrew. And somehow the people of Yericha said, the new branches that grew, that's not the problem. We're allowed to use it for our personal uses. And obviously the Chachamim said, what are you talking about? The trees were mekadesh, belong to the temple treasury, and therefore the new growths of the branches belong to the Beis Hamikdash, the bedek habayis, don't belong to you. So they told them off. And the Gemara is going to discuss what exactly was the Yisai, what were the people of Yericha thinking that they thought they can get away with this. We are now on the daf, Shabbos' daf, Num Vav Amud Aleph. V'oichlem mitachas hanishorim b'Shabbos, and they would eat the fallen fruits from beneath the trees on Shabbos, which you were allowed to. We're going to find why the Chachamim weren't happy. V'noistim peya liyerek, and they gave peya the yerek. What is peya? Peya is one of the things, peya shekri, leket shikra and peya, which was essentially the welfare, the social net that the Torah HaKadosh put into place, that in the fields, you had to leave over a peya, a corner of your field, to give over to the aniyim. One of the beauties of the peya, the grain, is that that grain of peya, was potter from giving trumas and maasros. You did not have to separate the tithe, because by definition, it really belonged to the aniyim. They were ownerless, belonging to whoever picked them up, to any aniyim that picked it up. The thing is like this: vegetables, as we're going to see, because they are not something that can be stored. Vegetables, if once you pick them, you have to eat them quickly. Otherwise, they get fashimel, they get ruined, right? So by definition, they are not part of peya. If they're not part of peya, therefore you're mechayev to give trumas maasros. You're mechayev to give trumas maasros. Certainly midrabanan, certainly rabbinically, you have to give trumas maasros. But in that case, if they did not, if the owners of the fields left over a corner of their vegetables for the aniyim, that was vegetables that needed to be taken off trumas maasros, which the owners did not do because they were still attached to the ground. So when the aniyim took them, the poor people thought that since there was peya, they weren't responsible for any tithing. And so they would eat them without tithing, thinking they didn't need to be tithed because of peya. And that meant they became to eat inadvertently tevel, stuff that needed to be tithed, which of course is an avera. So of course they were very unhappy about it. And the sages told them off about this. So now Gemara gets into different cases of things where the Chachamim were happy and the Chachamim were not. Tana Rabbanan, Shisha Devarim Isa Chizkiah Melech, the great Chizkiah Melech did 16. Chizkiah was the son of Achaz, who was a terrible, terrible Rasha, and was a terrible Rasha. And Chizkiah was a tzaddik Yisrael Olam. The Yeshaya's daughter married Chizkiah, and Yeshaya Hanavi, Isaiah the prophet's daughter, married Chizkiah, and Chizkiah was an unbelievable king, but it was at the beginning of the end of the first temple. This is when the Assyrians, Sancheriv, etc., came in, and he had to deal with that they were no longer really in control of Eretz Yisrael. In many ways, he turned into a puppet king, and eventually he was taken into Golus, into the diaspora. Tada Rabbana. Shisha Devarim Isa Chizkiah Melech. Chizkiah Melech did six things. Al Shloisha Haidulu, on three of them, the Chachamim were happy with him. But Al Shloisha Loi Haidulu, and on three of them, they did not agree. Gider Atzmois Aviv Al Mita Shel Chavolim. Chizkiah dragged the bones of his father Achaz to the grave on a bier of ropes. He treated his father's dead body with great disdain. And they praised him for it. He was a terrible Russian, more than a Russia. Achaz was depraved. And he brought in depraved practices throughout Klal Yisrael. And Chizkiah made a point to say he was my father, and still what he called, and they praised him for it. Kisas nochas anachishis, he grounded down the copper's nechishis snake, serpent that Moshe had made. If you remember when they had the great Magefa, the great pandemic in the wilderness, Moshe made a snake, a golden snake, and whoever looked at it got healed. And obviously it wasn't the snake that was healing, but by raising their eyes, Klapi Shemayim, and they're looking at the snake, and the idea being that just like a snake bites only because God says that you shall bite, right? Which is the famous story of Rav Hyrcanus, that what he called, where there was a snake bothering a town, and Hyrcanus and what he called, and the great Tana put his foot down, his heel down on the hole where the snake was, and the snake came and bit the Tana, and the snake died. And from there we learned it's not the snake that kills, it's the Averis that kill. And that was the idea. But of course, people over time started davening to the snake itself, to the golden snake. And so of course he crushed it and cleaned it out, and the Chachamim were happy about it. And then Gaza Sefer Refuah Isvaidulai. And he hid the book of remedies. There was a book back in the time with all the remedies to all the sicknesses in the world. And what he called, and it was an unbelievable book, and Chizkiah hid it because people stopped davening to Hashem when they got sick. They just went to the book. They think so. They lost the whole side of it again. And he said, better let them daven to Hashem than the other way. And the Chazal were agreed with him. And on three things he was not. Kitzeis delosei shel heichal v'shigron lemelech Asher. He cut down the doors of the Beis Hamikdash and sent it to the king of Assyria, which was Sancheriv. That what he called, he went ahead. What happened over there is that Sancheriv issued a great tax on the Chizkiah in order that he would retreat from Eretz Yisrael and take his troops out of Eretz Yisrael. He taxed him for this, and a terrible tribute, and he ran out of money. And so what he called, he had to strip the doors of the Beis Hamikdash. And then the Chachamim said, no, you shouldn't have done. You should have found another way to bribe him or rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but do not touch the house of Hashem. He stopped up the waters of the upper Gichain, but the Chazal did not agree with him. This is again when Sancheriv was coming in. He wanted to deprive them of water, the armies, the foreign armies of water, so he stopped it up, and they did not agree with him. And Ibn Nisim ben Nisim v'loy haydulay. And he once added an extra month into the Chodesh because Pesach has to fall out in the springtime, Chodesh Aviv, in the springtime. As you know, 7 times within a 19-year period, we added Adar Sheni, a second Adar. Now, obviously, this is before the calendar, but we still had to figure it out. But each year they would come to talk about it. But we always added in Adar, we would say, okay, we're adding an extra Adar. Once Nisan came, we're not supposed to be adding another Adar. We don't go backwards, saying, oh, even though we're in Nisan, we're going back and creating a new Adar. We don't do that. Chizkiah did it because it was right after his father's death, and people were still metama from all the depraved acts of his father, and he wanted those people to become tahor so they could bring the carbon Pesach again, but they did not agree with him. He said, no, Adar passed, you shouldn't have gone ahead and make an extra Adar once Nisan started. And they did not agree with him. They did not agree. We are now on 56A2. Now, we said like this, one of the things that the people of Chid, the people Anshe Yerichai did, the people of Thriga, which they were not told off by the sages, Markifin the Golem Kalayoim. They would grab palm trees the entire day of the 14th. Hechi Ovid, what did they do? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maisei Osadora, they would bring fresh myrtle, the Shichra the Daphna, and berries of a laurel tree, the Kimcha the Shari the Rami, the Monadol, Chalfi Alei Arbin Yomin, and barley flour that had been kept in a vessel for less than 40 days, means it hadn't been grounded. It hadn't been grounded more than 40 days before. Umar techei lahu, and they would boil the ingredients together. V'shadi le l'dikla belibe, and they would inject it into the heart of the palm tree, into the bark of the palm tree. V'chol the boy arba amis didei, and any other tree that was within 4 amis of this, 4 cubic amis of this tree. If they didn't do the exact same thing, give them this potion into the tree, Savi La'alta would wither right away because the tree would start sucking it up from its new strength. It would start sucking up the nutrients from all around. So this is not actually grafting. They called it grafting, but it wasn't grafting. It was some kind of serum that strengthened the trees. That's why the Chacham said there was no problem with grafting, which is an Issur min HaTorah, forbidden min HaTorah. That's why they didn't bring it up. So they didn't want them doing this. All the big problem with this, they did this even after midday of Erev Pesach. Rav Acha berei the Rav Ama minche bekufrei the dichel in the kuva. The people of Yericha would insert a male branch into a female branch. They would take a soft new branch and they would put it in by cutting a ridge into one of the older branches, and they would stick the new shoots into the old shoots, like a male into a female. And by doing that, they would graft. Now, this is not grafting because it's from the same tree, but they didn't like the fact they were doing it after Chatzos on Erev Pesach. The Chaychines Shema, they wrapped the Shema. Hechi Obdi. What did they do? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Aimrim Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. They said, here, O Israel, Hashem is God, Hashem is one. V'lo yayu maspeaking, and they did not separate the word Echad from the next word, V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, and you shall love Hashem Elokecha. It's possible they did this because Echad, Aleph Ches Dalid, is B'gematria 13. Ahava, Aleph Hey, Veis Hey, is also 13. 13 and 13 is 26. The numerical value of the Shem Havaya, Yud, K, Vav, K. So they might have done it for that. Anyways, it says the word, Rava Ama Maspik bin Hayah. The truth is they did separate between the Echad, the one, and the love. Elishayu Aimrim Hayoim Alav, right? Hayoim, today upon your heart, without pausing between the day, Hayoim and Al and B. The mashma Hayoim Alav, today it should be on your heart. But tomorrow it doesn't need to be on your heart. How did the people of Yericha wrap the Shema? And they did not separate between the word Echad and V'ahavta. They did separate. They did not stick in the middle. Baruch Shem, blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom, the Olam V'ed, for all eternity. We're now on 56A3. And actually, why do we say Baruch Shem? What's this idea of saying Baruch Shem between Shema and V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha? K'dedarish of Shimon ben Lakish, like Rish Lakish Darshan. The Amar of Shimon ben Lakish, Vayikra Yaakov el Bona b'Yom Hei Afsu v'Agidu Lachem. And Yaakov called to his sons and says, gather and I shall tell you about the end of days. Because Yaakov wanted to tell him what's going to happen all the way at the end. But the Shechina left him, and so he could not tell it over. So Yaakov said, is it possible there's a blemish among the issue of my bed? Is it possible that one of my sons does not believe in the complete unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the complete unity of Hashem? Avram sheyoytze mimenu Yishmael, like the case of Avram, who Yishmael came from him. Va'avi Yitzchak, and my father Yitzchak sheyoytze mimenu Esav, that Esav came from him. Amru lo banav, so his sons answered him, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Ashkiro Israel, Hashem is one. Hashem is our God. Hashem is one. They were addressing their father. That's where the Shema Yisrael, Hetzi Tata Yisrael, whose Yaakov's name was Yisrael, right? Kishem Amru, they said, Kishem Shem B'libach Echad, just as there's only one in your heart, Kach Ein Libenu Echad, there's only, and so too in our heart there's only one. Ba'is Shah, Pasuk Yaakov Avinu V'Ama, Baruch Shem Kivay Machusa D'Yolam Voed. So Amir Rabbanan, hey Chinavim, what should we do? Nemru, should we say Baruch Shem Kivay Machusa D'Yolam Voed between Shema and V'Yahavta? La Yamru Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe did not state it. Loi number, we shouldn't say it. Amru Yaakov. Yaakov Avinu did say it. So what's the compromise position? We said that we're going to say Baruch Shem, but we're going to say it quietly. And that's what we do, except on Yom Kippur. Amir Rabbi Yitzchak, Amir Debei Rabbi Amis, Marshal, it's a marshal, a bas melech she'erichot tzike kedera. It's like a king's daughter who passed by the kitchens of the castle and smells a stew seasoned with spices that was smelled, and she developed a craving for it. But now we got a problem. Im time yeshli genai. If she says, I want this, it's a disgrace for her. She's a princess. She shouldn't have feelings of gluttonous. Loitama yesh lotzar. If she doesn't say anything, she's going to be physically in pain because she desires it greatly. His chilu avadel, the servants, once they figured out what was going on with her, lahavi b'chashai. They started bringing her this stew quietly, covertly, quietly. Same thing with us. Baruch Shem k'may machuzid l'moed. We so desire to say it, but Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say, so we're not on the madrega to do it, so we say it quietly. Amar Rabavu, Hiktinu shoya oimim oise b'kol ram. The Chazal later said that we should say Baruch Shem k'may machuzid with a loud voice. Because of the murmurings of the heretics. The heretics said, we're saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, we're whispering we must be whispering something else about a second God. About a Yoshkach. You can imagine about when the Christians started. So when the Hadoy, the Lekamina, but in Hadoy where there are no heretics, Ad Hashta Amir Lebechashecha, they still say it quietly. There they say it's quietly, and today, of course, we continue to say it quietly, even though there are plenty of heretics, right? That's not the point. The point is, today it's clear that everybody knows the Jews believe in one, the Holy One, and nothing but the one. Tanu Rabbana. Six things that people of Anshe Yerichai, the people of Yerichai did, of Jericho did, Shleisha Baratzin Chachamim, three with the wishes of the Chachamim, Shleisha Baratzin Chachamim. Three, not with the wishes of Chachamim. This is different a little bit from our Mishnah, which our Mishnah says they just didn't get, they weren't told off. Not that they were, that the Chachamim would completely agree, but we'll see what it goes. These were done with the wishes of the Chachamim. Machivin the kolim kolayim, they would graft the trees all day of the 14th. The koichin and shema, they would wrap the shema. The koitzim lifnei oimer, and they would reap before the oimer was brought on the 16th. They would reap the one from the grains that were brought from the not so great grains from the valleys and the mountains. The elu shaloi b'ratzin chachamim, and these are what the chacham did not do. Koitzim lifnei oimer, they would stack. It's one thing to reap them, but to prepare them, to clean them up, to take them out of their husk and to stack them up, this they were not happy about. Before the bringing of the Omer. Upoitzim perotzes beginosayim upadisayim, and they would make breaches in their fences in the gardens and orchards before Shabbos. La'echol neshel la'aniyim b'shnei abetzaris, in order to feed the fallen fruits to the poor during the years of famine. And still they were beyond the Shabbos v'Yom Tovim, for Shabbos and Yom Tov. But they didn't make the breaks on Shabbos and Yom Tov. They opened up their gates so that on Shabbos and Yom Tov the poor people could come in and take it. So how come they're not happy with it? The Gemara is going to talk about it. Umatirin gazmino shel hegdish shel kori b'shel shikma, and they were permitted for personal use the branches of boxa trees and the sycamore trees belonging to the Bedek Habayis, the temple treasury, which is very strange. Divrei Rameir, and obviously the Gemara's got to explain all this. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda, im beratzeh chachamim ma'asin, if the people of Yericho acted in the first three cases with the wishes of the chachamim, you call adam ma'asin, then everybody should do it. The truth is, the people of Yericho did it without the wishes of the chachamim, but they didn't tell them off. But on three of the six, they told them off. The Rabbanan, the Chachamim, told off the people. Even though they disproved of them, they did not tell them off. And these are the ones that they did not tell them off, even though they weren't happy that they were doing it. They were grafting the palm trees, meaning they were strengthening the palm trees with that serum that they put into it. All day, they didn't stop at Chatzos. The Kohen Shema, they wrapped the Shema. Either they attached Echad to a Haba, or Wilababachem Hayoim, they didn't separate those words. Well, they didn't say Baruch Shem Kavay Malchusai, whichever the reasons are. The Koitzim, the Goyshim Lifnei Ayman, they would reap and stack the grains before the Ayman was brought, even though these grains were the weaker, the Shvacher grains from the valleys and the mountains, which weren't worthy of being born metabarts for the Omer itself. Nonetheless, they weren't allowed to be eaten before the Omer. So even though Minatori, you might have been able to reap them and possibly stack them up, but the Chacham didn't want you to do any of that because you might come to eat it. The Elus Mishamichu, but they didn't complain. They didn't reprove that. They didn't scream, no, you shouldn't do it. But the Elus Shemichu Biyodam, and these are the ones that they not only did not like, but they told them off. Matir Gadvida Shel Heder Shel Krub Shel Shikma, that the people would permit for personal use the branches of carobs or sycamores belonging to the Bedek Habayis. This they didn't tell them off. They said, what are you doing? Umaritza Pirtzis Beginasayim Upadisayim, and they made breaches in their fields. And so that the poor people could come eat for Shabbos and Yom Tov in the days of the famine, which we have to understand, why wouldn't they be happy with this? Nice and pay, and they left over vegetables as pay, as a corner left over for the aniyim. And since vegetables, as we're going to learn, are not permanent things, meaning if you pick them, they get ruined pretty quickly. So they're not good for pay, which means if they're not good for pay, they are payer is potter. You do not have to tithe. Obviously, vegetables, then you do have to tithe because they're not agreed for payer. But the poor people wouldn't know that. They simply see them in the corner. They think it's payer. They take them and they eat it because they think they don't need to tithe them, when in fact they didn't need to tithe them. The Chachamim not only were not happy about them, but they told them off. There's a Rabbi Yehuda really hoped that the reaping before the Omer offering is against the against the wishes of the Chachamim. But we learned in a Mishnah in Menachos, Anshe Yericho, the people of Jericho, the people of Yericho, did reap the grains before the Omer was brought with the well wishes of the Chachamim. The Goychim Lifnei Omer Shaloi B'Ratzon Chachamim, but they would stack them up, clean them up, take off the husk, and stack them up, not against the wishes of the Chachamim. But the Chachamim did not reprove them. So you see from here that reaping them, cutting them, is certainly not a problem, because the only thing that they were happy about was the stacking of them, getting them ready. They weren't happy with, and even there they didn't tell them off. So reaping for sure was not a problem. So why does Rabbi Yehuda say otherwise? We are now on 56b1. 56b1. We are a Nun Vav Amid Beis. So my mashmalei de Omar. Nichu v'loy nichu, that the Chazal reproved or didn't reprove the people of Yerichai. That was Rabbi Yehuda, right? Which we said that the Mishnah was Rabbi Yehuda. V'ketani kaitzim b'ratzon chachamim. Yet the Mishnah taught over here in Menachis that they were allowed to reap before the Omer was brought, before the Minchas Omer was brought on the 16th of Nisan. They were allowed to reap, and the Chachamim were perfectly happy with it. So what's going on? But if that's the case, Hani Abahave, then you'd actually have four, right? You'd have four practices over here: the grafting, the wrapping of the Shema, the reaping, and the stacking. Ella Same Mechan Kitzira. And this brisa is obviously a mistake. Take out the words reaping from the brisa, and now the brisa accords with the Mishnah. And both that the rabbis had fully approved the reaping grain in Yerichai before the Omer was brought. Because reaping is fine, because these grains were not worthy, Meitab Haaretz, were not made to be brought for the Omer, so you could reap it. But that's as far as you can go. You can't prepare it, because then you might come to eat it. Umatirin gamize shel hegdish shel kruv shel shikma. And they would permit, the people of Yerichai would permit the using of the branches of the sycamore trees and the carob trees, the boxer trees, that their fathers had been mekadesh, had consecrated to the Beis Hamikdash after the first time, after they had trimmed it, they had consecrated the trunks of the trees to the Bedek Habayis. So, Amru, what were the people of Yerichai thinking? Amru, Aveseinu, our forefathers, Loyik Diju Elakairis, they only made holy the trunks of the trees. And therefore, we're allowing for our personal use the new branches that have subsequently grown from the trunks of the trees that belong to the temple's treasury, to the Bedek Habayis. And what are we dealing with over here? What are we talking about? We're dealing with branches that grow after the tree trunks were made holy with the consecration of the tree trunks. The people of Yerichai held, like the one who holds, there's no such thing as the Isser of Me'ilah, of using inappropriately the Beis Hamikdash's property, the Bedek Habayis' property inadvertently, which is the Isser Me'ilah. Not in the case of subsequent growth, because the halach is as follows. The Isser of Me'ilah is only on something that you are Mekadesh, that was Mekadesh B'neder, was Mekadesh by a promise, by an oath, by words that say, I hereby am Mekadesh X, Y, and Z. By you being Mekadesh this, you have raised it up to holiness, and now if it's used in an inappropriate way, you're chayav b'me'ilah. When something becomes kodesh memela, automatically it becomes kodesh. The trunks of the trees are kodesh. The branches were not there. They grow automatically. And automatically, because they're attached to the trunk, these new growths become kodesh. When something becomes kodesh automatically without having to go ahead and use words, neder, there is no Isser Me'ilah. There is no punishment of Me'ilah, of using it inappropriately. So the people of Yerichai said, since they grow automatically, right? There's no Isser of Me'ilah. There's no Isser of Me'ilah. Means if there's no Isser of Me'ilah, of using it inappropriately, it means I'm allowed to use it. The Rabbanan held, need Me'ilah Leka. You're right. There's no biblical law of Me'ilah here, because the biblical law is only where a person goes ahead and with his words goes ahead and removes something from chulin, from regular, and raises it up himself into holiness. There you can have the Issa Me'ilah. You're right. This, something that becomes holy on its own, becomes kodesh memela, becomes kodesh by itself, right? It's kodesh, and you're right, but there's no Isser Me'ilah. There's no Isser Me'ilah. But Kodesh it is. It's Surah Miyik, and there is certainly an Isser. There's certainly an Isser. You might not get punished for using it inappropriately, but that doesn't take away the Isser. You're not allowed to do it in the first place. So don't do it. And during the years of famine, they would make breaches in the fences so that the poor people could come in on Yontif for Shabbos and Yontif to eat the fallen fruits on Shabbos and Yontif. What are we talking about here? Only in the case of dates that fall on Shabbos and therefore are caught in the upper branches of the tree, and so therefore you're going to have to climb up on the tree to get to them. And there's an Issa D'Rabbanan of climbing up on trees because they're afraid you're going to climb up on the tree and to remove something, and you're going to end up picking something off the tree and kaitzer and harvest what's on the tree. You're going to something that's mechuber to the tree, that's attached to the tree. You're going to talush. You're going to remove it from the tree, which is an Issa D'Oraisa of kaitzer. The case is where the dates are falling and they're caught in the branches of the leaves of the upper branches of the palm tree. We're afraid you're going to climb the tree and to remove the dates that are detached, and by accident you're going to remove dates that are attached. And the dates that are attached, if you remove it, you're over an Issa D'Oraisa, something that's biblically forbidden. The people of Yericha and Jericho said, we do not worry about that you might come. There is no gezerah of climbing on the tree that to remove dates that are detached, that you might come to remove dates that are attached. But everybody agrees, even the Rabbanon, that if they're in the lower branches of the tree, so that you don't have to climb up on the tree to get them, it's therefore mutter for the people to take. Amalei Rabba, it's not Rabba, it's Rabba. Amalei Rabba to Ula, Vahamuksa Ninu, but we're dealing with Muksa. These dates that fell, they weren't prepared before Shabbos, so therefore they're Muksa. We learned this before. You say, no, since they're fit for ravens to eat, I will answer that just because they're fit for ravens doesn't move it, doesn't change it from its muksa, from its muksa classification. Now, as we're going to see, something that's prepared for human consumption is not considered prepared for dogs. If an animal was not already a carcass from before Shabbos, and that means it dies on Shabbos, it's also to cut it up on Shabbos, because it's not something that was prepared for the dogs, because it wasn't prepared before Shabbos. How can you say something that's prepared for our ravens is automatically considered prepared for people? You see that clearly it's not the case. What do you call it? It's not prepared before Shabbos. It's not prepared for Shabbos. What are you talking about? Amalei, you're right. An object prepared for humans is not considered prepared for dogs. Because one who's not mentioned, something that's not mentally set aside for his own Shabbos use is not set aside at all. But something that's prepared for ravens is also prepared for humans, because it's not a level, it's dates. And anything that's used that is usable for a human being is on his mind that, you know what, maybe I'm going to use him on Shabbos. He also Rabban Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish, when Rabban came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel, he said in the name of Reish Lakish or Rab Shimon ben Lakish, Machlaikis b'shel ben kifim. We have a machlaikis. The machlaikis is only in the case of dates that are caught in the lower branches of the trees. There are abundant savi muchanei robin loy havi muchanei adam. Something prepared for ravens. Now that prepared for ravens is not considered prepared for people, and therefore it's muksa. And the people of Yericha were wrong for opening up the gates and letting the poor people in to take from the trees. Things that are prepared for ravens are prepared for humans. Therefore, we're perfectly right for letting the aniyim in. But everybody agrees that the dates in the upper branches of the tree, where you have to climb up the tree, and you certainly might come to pick or unhook an attached date. You biblically, you're also according to even the people of Yerichai, because you might come and to remove something, pick a date that unfortunately that is attached to the tree, and then you would be over on a nisa d'oraisa. The nice in payah liyerik, and they would give payah from vegetables. The less lahul anchi Yericha, the people of Yericha didn't know of this learning of the Mishnah and payah, which says it great in the first parak of payah, which is pretty straight out. Klal amr b'payah. These are the general rules regarding the halachas of payah. Payah meaning like the payis, the corner of the field that you have to leave over. Kol shu oichel, any crop that's a regular food. V'nishmar, and is protected, meaning it's protected. It's got a gate around it. It's watched. The gedule min aretz, and whose growth comes, who's nourished from the ground. It gets nourished from the ground. V'likosei ka'achas, and when you gather it as one. You harvest it as one. Umachnisa lekiyim, and it's brought in. It's stored to last. It could be last in the storage houses. Chayev b'peya, these are chayev b'peya, and therefore, since it's chayev b'peya, it's therefore potter from having to be tight from trumas maasros. The Gemara explains, kol shu oichel, anything that's food, prat l'sefichek sotis v'koitza, to exclude the aftergrowth of certain flowers. V'nisha b'prat lahefka, protected means to the something that's ownerless, where somebody made it hefka, that it's wild, he unprotected, said anybody can have it. Gedule min aretz, and it's nourished from the ground. Prat lechemehin upatrios. That means to the exclusion of truffles and mushrooms that are actually nourished from the ear. They're nourished from the ear. Kitosan ka'achas prat l'teinim, and they're gathered in one time to exclude figs, because figs, some grow faster, some grows not, others some ripen quicker, some ripen not as quick. Umachnisa lekiyum prati regim, and what brings into last to be stored away, to the exclusion of vegetables. So vegetables are not something that are used for payah, and since it's not used for payah, they need to be tied. So why in the world were they leaving over a corner of vegetables and therefore making them putting a stumbling block in front of the poor people that they were going to eat, to take it and eat it without tithing, think it was payah? The people of Yomi also agree, of Yericha, of Jericho, agree that vegetables by and large, of course, are not suitable for payah. But we're talking about over here the leaves of turnips. Turnip bulbs, everybody agrees, are payah, because turnip bulbs are like onion bulbs. They last and last and last and last. If you dig them up and pre-plant them, they last, they can be stored away. The leaves that grow out of them is what we're talking about. And if those leaves, they want to bring it in and pickle them and whatever it is. And the people of Yericha and the Rabbanon disagreed concerning an item that's brought into last only by the means of another item. In other words, that the bulb of the turnip, of the onion, that could be put away. That could be payah, because it's something that lasts for sure. The leaves are only because they come as an outgrowth of the bulb. The question is, can we bring those in or not? They said that the people held that an item that is brought into last by means of another item is considered lasting. Therefore, a corner of the field of turnip leaves, the turnip leaves are mechayev in payah, and therefore they don't have to be tight, and therefore we can leave it for the poor people. Umar Sava, and the Rabbanon hold lo yishmei kiyum, and the Rabbanon hold that it is not considered lasting. Each thing is mutually exclusive. The bulbs are the bulbs, and yes, the bulbs can be kept for payah because they're lasting. The leaves by themselves, once they're separated from the bulbs, are not lasting. They're not lasting, therefore they're not lasting. The leaves are separate from the bulbs, and you do not compare one with the other. Okay, we are now holding 2 lines on the bottom on 56b3 to the end of the daf of Shabbos' daf of Nun Vav Amid Beis. And as we spoke, please, Sunday and Monday, I'm most likely not giving shir. So please go, that means that it's 57 and 58, the beginning of 58. If you can please get to 58b, 58b2, and the words over there about 10 lines on the bottom, Tanu Rabbanon Minyan Shloyoye Dava Koinum L'Tomid. That means it's the Rabbanon taught. From where do we know that nothing should come before the morning Tomid, that the Tomid shall boiker is the first